Hi guys, in today's video I'm going to go over answering 12 markers with you. But before I do, I want you to make sure that you press the buttons at the bottom and like the video if you like it and subscribe. And also if you want any other videos, any content or any other how to answer questions, etc., just leave a comment in the comments box and I'll see what I can do. So I'm going to post this on my Instagram account because all of these boards, the big boards and the small boards, I post on Insta, and that's exactly the same name. It's JC Jog Support. So if you want a copy of this, you'll find it on my Instagram account. Now, 12 markers. If you go onto the internet, you'll read lots and lots of different things about how to answer them. Sometimes a little confusing, sometimes they disagree with each other, and I've done quite a lot of research and I've been on quite a lot of sites. I've been on teacher sites, I've been on revision sites, etc., and I put this together because it seems to make sense. If you deviate from it slightly, I wouldn't worry too much. The main idea is the assessment part of it. That's the main idea. But before we get into that, if it's a 12 marker, you're looking at spending for A-level about 12 to 15 minutes, and it doesn't seem like a lot of time, so you have to really get going and you have to really be clear about what you're writing. So I would say that you're going to write about 2 to 3 main points. Okay, I'd say write 3 main points here for 12 marks. If you write 2, it might be a little bit too short, so if you write 3 marks, I think you're going to get all 12 of the marks. So I'm going to look at this in terms of the command words assess and evaluate. Now, when I look in the Edexcel textbook and I look at assess and evaluate and I look at the definitions, it's exactly the same definition, like exactly the same. I would suggest that do a conclusion for both assess and evaluate. I've heard that you don't necessarily need a conclusion for an assess question, but I would just do one anyway because you're not going to lose any marks and you're going to really use that assessment or evaluation to tell the examiner how important those points are that you've been making in relation to the question. So the first thing I would do, very first thing, is I would decode the question, and I would take a pen or a pencil and I would start annotating around that question. I'd look at the command word, I'd look at the topic, what are the main things that you're going to have to be thinking about for that, what are the main factors that you're going to pull out. The question might give you a factor and say assess the significance or assess how important this factor is. And then you're going to have to think of some other factors. Now, there's no real right or wrong for those other factors as long as you consider some other factors. And you're going to kind of know what they are anyway because you've revised. So do that. Think about what the question is about, what's it getting at, because you need to be quite clear before you start, otherwise you might waste your time. So that's going to be kind of a little plan in a way, and then you can get going on the rest of your answer. So paragraph 1, this is the introduction. Now the introduction does not need to be long. It needs to be maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and you need to kind of define the command word. And then you need to state the general argument. What are you going to be talking about within your essay? What are you going to be considering? So just set out that so the examiner can see that you understand what the question's about, but don't spend an awful lot of time with this because there's just not enough time and you don't get enough marks for it. Then get straight into the main body of the question or the answer. And this is going to be split up into 2 or 3 paragraphs depending on how many points you want to make. So 2 to 3 detailed points. Now I'm going to follow the PEAL, the PEAL, but when you do a bit of research, or your teacher might be telling you PEEL or just PE or something, but that's what I'm going to do now. And as long as you kind of follow the instructions that I'm going to give you, I wouldn't worry too much about those letters. So point, explanation or example, assess and link, that's what we're going to look at. So for each point, you're going to take the point, that's your factor, and you're going to explain. That's the AO1, is the explanation of what it is. What is that factor? What does that factor mean? That's your description. Now, generally, there's less marks for AO1 because that's just content. Most of the marks are for AO2, which is the assess part of the answer. So you're going to give the point, give an example of the point and a few key facts or something about the point. That's quite important to do. If you don't know any, just carry on. You'll lose 1 or 2 marks, but you'll gain more than you'll lose. Don't not answer the question. Then you need to assess the importance of that factor, okay? And I've done a little continuum here, hopefully to help you. And you need to look at, for each of the points that you're considering, is it very important? Is that point that you've considered very important in answering that question? Is it very significant? Is it very successful? If you're talking about management strategies, is it the most successful point? you're talking about something to do with regeneration, is I don't know, poverty the most important factor, or are there other points that are important in your answer? And then the other part of the continuum is obviously the next factor might be unimportant, the next factor might be insignificant or less significant or not as successful. So these are the that's the spectrum. Now what I would suggest is that most of the points that you're going to make are fairly significant, otherwise you wouldn't be mentioning them, but some will be more significant than others. So that's your assessment. How significant is that factor in answering that question? Now, in a couple of other videos that I'm going to do, I will do a couple of these. I will look at specific questions for you and we will kind of answer them together. And so it might be a little bit more applicable because you'll have a question to go on. But that's what you're going to be considering in each of those 3 paragraphs, okay? And then you need to, in each paragraph, you need to make sure you've got ongoing assessment. So how important is that? Link back to the question, answer the question. Now, I always say to my students, and I've said this before in my videos, you won't find the assess and the linking in a textbook. The textbook mostly has AO1, which is content, and it's up to you to think about which is the most significant factor. Okay, so let's say you're doing coastal geography or something like that. Which form of management is most successful and why? So you're going back to the question and you're linking your point back to the question. So each paragraph follows that same format. Give the point, give the factor, explain it, say what it is, give a little example, and then get on with assessing how important that factor is. Okay, so you've done that 3 times, 2 or 3 times. And I've given a few ideas of the language that you can use. So this is important because, okay, this factor is significant as, this has been successful as it has, okay? And then to counterbalance that, maybe with another factor, however, this factor is less important because, so you're using that kind of language right the way through, and that's signposting to the examiner that you're answering that question. Okay, and then finally, as we said there, it says link each factor back to the question for each point. And then finally, a conclusion. Now, assess doesn't necessarily need a conclusion, but evaluate does. But I think it's good practice if you have time to do it for both. So here it says, go back to the main question and answer the question, okay? Which is the most important factor? And overall, how important were the main points that you're making? And I read this the other day, which I think is quite nice. So let's say you've got 3 points that you've made. It's said to consider them as like in the Olympic Games where you've got a gold point, a silver point and a bronze point. So which is your gold point? Which is your most important factor? And why are the other 2 not as significant or important? And I quite like that, so I'm going to steal it. I think it was from one of my teacher groups, so I'm sorry, but I've stolen it. So gold, silver and bronze. I did want to put them in different colours, but the gold didn't show up and I don't have silver. So you're stuck with red. So think about each of the points, and in your conclusion, which of those 3 points that you've made is the most important factor to answer your question. So go back up. Now, very briefly, if that's a 20 marker, which I will do another video on 20 markers, it's more or less the same format, but you're going to make 4 to 5 points and it's going to take you about 20 minutes. It's no different. The words are no different. The command words are no different. The way you lay it out is no different. You're just making more points. So I would honestly say the difference between a 12 and a 20 marker is the length of the essay. Now, always with a 20 marker, you will need a conclusion. And with an evaluate question, you will need a conclusion. But I think good practice is putting a conclusion into an assess question, because you are going to assess more if you write a conclusion. So I'm hoping that is useful. Please like the video and subscribe if you haven't. I don't know why the hell you haven't. And leave me a comment if there are other videos that you want, or content that you want, or any other exam style questions, or ways to answer exam style questions that you want. Other than that, have a great evening.